Yeah. All right, this would be Unit 5, loudness and pitch, as we zoom on to finish this, psychoacoustics this semester. This topic is somewhat related to what we covered in Unit 4, and I'll take a peek at it. And what I'll do is share the screen now so that we can look at some of the notes and the PowerPoint that go with it. So here would be the notes. Looking at psychoacoustics, loudness and pitch. Chapter 7 is what what your reading would be in this. And we're talking about two psychoacoustics parameters: loudness, which goes with intensity, and pitch, which goes with frequency. And as we studied at the beginning of the semester, intensity and frequency are physics. Intensity and frequency are science. Loudness is one's perception of intensity. Pitch is one's perception of frequency. You see, there's always there's always the objective and the subjective, and psychoacoustics is our perceptions. And if we look at what it says here, loudness measured in phons, P-H-O-N-S. No, the HIS doesn't sit there dealing with phons all the time. Please don't think you will, but you need to know what they are. Loudness is the psychoacoustic perceptual correlate for physical intensity. In English, loudness is perception of intensity. Curves show that there's a difference between loudness and intensity. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any curves. I'll show you. Curves represent phons, the psychoacoustic unit used to measure the sensation of loudness. So here we go. We'll take a peek here. You'll remember studying this way back in the beginning of the semester that dealt with the decibel. Remember that? So that here's your pressure, dynes per centimeter squared on the horizontal. This was your decibels that corresponded to those pressures. And you'll recall every time you increase the pressure by 10, you increased your decibels by 20. And we said 200 is 1,000,000 times the softest that you can hear. And 120 is the loudest you can tolerate, and 0 is the softest we can hear. We all said that was the softest pressure required for a normal hearing human to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance with 2 ears. And we called that the ground, 0 dB SPL. Well, okay, that's history. Now let's look at the phons. And we looked a little bit at this last week and the week before too, but now we're going to start looking at these upper curves, okay? The bottom one is minimal audible field, MAF. So look at 1,000 hertz. We called the softest pressure you could hear that it required for us to just barely hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. We called that 0. And when we played that same game with other frequencies, look at this. More pressure was required. Or, you needed more decibels to just barely hear. So obviously you needed more pressure. Okay, what I'm trying to draw your attention to is the fact that this is a curve in the first place. All right, because if we humans heard all frequencies equally, there wouldn't be a curve. It would be a flat line. But because of the resonances of our outer ears and the resonances of our middle ears, we hear these frequencies right here the best, because the softest decibels are required. And look at here how it actually goes below 0. Our hearing is even better at 2,000 hertz, better at 3,000 hertz than it is at 1. Okay? But the game was played starting at 1,000 hertz. And we arbitrarily decided that 0 dBSPL was the softest pressure required to hear a 1,000 hertz, because 1,000's nicely in the middle. We just started there. Then we went up in frequency and we went down in frequency, and obviously more pressure was required. But we don't have to talk about the pressures anymore because we defined 0 as the softest pressure it took to hear a 1,000 hertz tone. And so, okay, now we know what the ground is. We now know that to hear lower frequencies, more decibels are required. And to hear higher frequencies, more decibels are required. So you've got this smile. But what I want to now underline very carefully is when you look at this bottom curve and imagine it to be a series of dots, like and each represents a different frequency, okay? All of those dots, every frequency represented on this bottom curve is heard equally loud. How loud? Just barely audible. That's how loud, because this represents threshold, and threshold is the softest you can hear. And when you're listening to the softest you can hear, obviously it's not very loud. So how loud is each frequency on this bottom curve? Just barely audible. That's how loud. Okay, you might think, well, that's common sense. Well, now look, my better half is writing about me cleaning the oven. Okay, now look at the middle curve. Look at the middle curve. See, it's not quite as pronounced, is it? It's a little bit flatter. Well, what we did here was we cranked 1,000 hertz. Look at 1,000 hertz. We cranked it up to 40 dBSPL, okay? Which is not very loud. 40 is quite soft. 40 is probably, it's not very, it's audible. You hear it, okay? We turned 1,000 hertz up to 40, and we asked the person to say, okay, remember how loud that was. Remember how loud that is. It's not very loud, but keep a mental image or memory about the loudness of that 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB, okay? And now I'm going to turn 2,000 hertz up, and I want you to tell me when 2,000 hertz sounds just as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did. And then I'll play that with 4,000 hertz. I'm going to turn 4,000 hertz up, and you tell me when it sounds just as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did at 40. And then I'll try it at 8,000 hertz, and you tell me when the 8,000 hertz tone sounds just as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone at 40. And then we'll go lower in frequency. And I'll turn 100 hertz up, and I'll say, you let me know when that 100 hertz tone sounds just as loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did at 40. Basically, if you played that whole game, you'd get a second curve. It would be sort of reminiscent of the bottom curve, but just not quite as pronounced. It would not quite as deep. But the important thing to remember again is every frequency along this middle curve is heard equally loud. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dBSPL. That's how loud. Okay, so the loudness of these tones is 40 fons. The loudness of the bottom one, minimal audible pressure, all frequencies here are equally loud too. How loud? Just barely audible. We'll call that 0 fons. Okay, let's go to the top. The top one. And now we're going to crank 1,000 hertz up to 120 dB. Now this is a nasty experiment. 1,000 hertz at 120, which is loud. And then we played the same game with other frequencies. We would turn other frequencies and up until they sounded equally loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did at 120. Then we'll turn lower frequencies up, and we'll ask the subject to say, okay, tell us when those are equally loud to the 1,000 hertz tone at 120. And look at how flat things got. See how the curve flattens out? You see, this is this is psychoacoustics, okay? Because if we weren't a being or a creature with ears and a brain like we've got, everything would be exactly the same. It would be a machine, but we are not a machine. We are human beings. Okay? So our perceptions are a little bit different than reality. And that's the thing we need to bring home here. Look at the dynamic range. That word, dynamic range, is an important word. Dynamic range is the decibel distance between the softest you can hear and the loudest you can tolerate. Okay? Look at the low frequencies. Look at here. Here it's like 65 maybe. It takes this very low frequency, about 65 decibels, for us to just barely hear it. And then look at the loudest we can tolerate. It's 120. What's 120 minus 65? About 55. Our dynamic range, our floor to ceiling decibel distance that we can hear from just barely audible, look at my cursor, to screaming loud, that decibel distance is pretty small. But when you get to the middle pitches, the floor to the ceiling is more forgiving. We've got about 100 decibels or 120 decibels dynamic range. Okay, that's one thing to take home about this. Okay, because the very fact that this top curve flattens out, whereas the bottom curve is really curved like a smile, that's going to make the dynamic range smaller at some frequencies, bigger at the other frequencies. So our dynamic range of hearing is smaller for the low frequencies. The decibel distance between the softest we can hear compared to the loudest we can tolerate, that decibel distance is fairly small. The floor to ceiling is kind of squished. But when we get to the middle frequencies, it gets bigger. Weird, huh? Now let's talk about boom boxes. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to have to look at my ugly mug here and think about stereos and guys with their cars and equalizers and boom boxes and things that play music. Okay? And when you look at a stereo or an amplifier or CD players or whatever, boom boxes that people take to the beach or on picnics, you'll notice that there's often a switch called bass boost or loudness. You ever remember seeing a switch like that? Take a look when you start peeking at some radios or stereos or boom boxes of some type, and you'll notice a switch called loudness or bass boost. Now, you know why you've got that? I'll tell you why. I'll share my screen again. I'll show you why you have those. Because look at this picture. We don't hear the low frequencies as well. We need more decibels to hear the bass. Our hearing is better for the high frequencies. We don't hear the bass, especially when it's soft. If the volume is soft, we need that bass boost. But looky, here comes Cookie. If we crank up the volume, we don't need that bass boost anymore. Look at the line, look at the curve. So bass boost or loudness on a stereo is only used when the volume is turned down and you want to make the sound richer. You want to hear it with a bit more bass, because we don't hear the bass as well when the volume is soft. But when you crank up the volume, we hear all the different frequencies equally loud. We no longer need that artificial boost of the bass frequencies anymore. Outer limits. Weird. Okay, let's look at our notes and follow along here. Fawn lines or curves result from the various resonances of the outer and middle ears. Your concha bowl, you may have studied this in anatomy class. Your concha bowl resonates between 5 and 6,000 hertz. Your ear canal, external auditory meatus. Okay, it resonates between 1 and 4,000 hertz with a peak at around 2,700 hertz. Your middle ear ossicles, they resonate at around 2,000 hertz. So when you put those resonances together, you've got the curve. That's why we hear these frequencies better. It's because of the resonances of our outer ears and middle ears. Each point, as this is all review now, each point on any one of those curves, each point on any one of those curves shows the relative intensity in dBSPL that it takes to hear all the frequencies equally loud. Again, each point on the bottom curve is heard equally loud. How loud? Just barely audible. That's how loud. Each point on the middle curve is heard equally loud. How loud? As loud as the 1,000 hertz tone did at 40 dB. Each point on the top curve is heard equally loud. How loud? As the 1,000 hertz tone cranked up to 120. That's how loud. All right, just the general picture here. And it says, look at the bottom curve first. This could be minimal audible field or minimal audible pressure. We stipulate it as minimal audible field. Remember that MAF will always be somewhat better than MAP because it's 2 ears instead of just 1 ear. Then look at the top curve. This is the loudness discomfort across the frequencies because that's the ceiling. That literally is our ceiling of loudness tolerance. Notice how the top curve flattens out. Note the curves flatten out as intensity increases. The difference in decibels SPL required to hear all frequencies equally loud, those differences decrease as the intensity goes up. The smile begins to flatten out. See how at low intensity levels, loudness depends on the physical intensity but a little bit on frequency. As intensity increases, however, loudness becomes more and more independent of frequency. The curves flatten out at the top. Psychoacoustics, loudness seems to grow more rapidly and grow like a seed into a tree, from just barely audible to too loud. That growth happens more quickly for the very low frequencies. That dynamic range. Tie that together with a bow, okay? Tie it together with the growth of loudness. Loudness grows from a seed, just barely audible, to an ancient tree over a range of about 60 decibels here. Loudness grows more slowly from an infant into an old person over more slowly here because the range is bigger. All right, loudness growth and reduced dynamic range. Fawn lines show dynamic range between the bottom and top curves. Dynamic range is largest for the mid frequencies, smallest for the low frequencies. See, they're right there in the notes. You'd think I wrote these things. And then it says here, fawn lines and stereos and equalizers. For soft music, to hear all frequencies equally loud, we need an artificial boost of lows, but especially the lows, not the highs so much, especially the lows. Equalizer buttons, often shaped like a smile. Loudness switch is a poor man's amplifier in English. Let's look at the next slide here. I'm going to show you something here. This is what you often see. There you go. When you see equalizers in stereo, sometimes they do this. Look at this. Look, these are frequencies. And now notice how the boost, we're giving more to the very lows, and you need a little bit more for the very highs too. It's like a smile. There's that smile again. Okay? And that is a more detailed, hi Nisha, Welcome to the welcome. Good thing we're recording this. I've talked maybe for about, I'd say 10, 15 minutes so far. So, but you can listen to it, of course, yourself earlier. All right, good to see more faces joining us today. So this is how we boosted loudness for the lows, and people can boost treble if they want to. So you'll see this when you start looking at stereo equipment. Oftentimes at soft volumes, the loudness, the equalizer will be shaped much like that smile. Kind of interesting. Okay, let's look at the next, let's look at this slide here. Well, there's something about that 40, okay? There's something about it. Fawns all center around 1,000 hertz. We kept talking here about the loudness of 1,000 hertz matching other frequencies to 1,000 hertz, right? We talked at the top curve, matching the loudness of other frequencies to the loudness of 1,000 hertz at 120. All right, now let's look at that more closely. Look at this guy right here. You'll see the dot in the center. The loudness of a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL. Okay, we're going to call that one sone. Look at this. That's why the arrow is here. One sone. They'll call that a sone. Now, how loud is? See, now we're no longer comparing different frequencies to 1,000 hertz anymore. We did that on the prior slide here. We were comparing the loudness of all other frequencies to the loudness of 1,000 hertz at 0 dB. And at the middle curve, we compared the loudness of other frequencies, all those other frequencies, to the loudness of 1,000 hertz. And we did the same. But now we want to talk about what's twice as loud as, or half as loud as. And this has practical meaning if you think about going to Lowe's or hardware stores and where you're going to buy a kitchen fan for your stove. Okay? What's the loudness of the fan? And you think about that versus the loudness of an El Cheapo fan. I'll stop sharing here and just take this home. When you talk about the loudness of an El Cheapo fan at a campground washroom, push the button. Wah! Yeah, it works, but it's loud. Cheap fans are loud. Expensive fans are quiet. You want to pay $200 for a fan above your stove that sucks up the stove odors and stuff like that, but you want that fan quiet? You will be paying money for that fan because when you turn it on, it's really soft. Okay? And guess what? When you look at the instructions of those fans, they're going to say, oh, this fan is 3 sones. This fan is 2 sones. This fan is 1 sone. Well, if it's 1 sone, it's the loudness of a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 dB SPL, which is soft. Because what's background ambient room noise? 40 dB SPL. The sound in your room sitting there when you're not talking is about 35 to 40 dB SPL. Remember, average speech is about 65. Yelling is at about 85. We almost never hear down to 0 dB unless you're getting a hearing test done under headphones in a sound-treated room. Our ears are always getting 20 to 30 to 40 dB. When you're sleeping, anytime, you're always getting that. So a 1 sone fan is quiet, and you will pay for that fan. But if you want to buy a fan at the hardware store for $6, well, that fan will probably be about 3 or 4 sones. It's going to be, you get what you pay for. And that's how the talk of this stuff actually relates to reality. So on the one hand, we were talking about comparing the loudness of frequencies to each other. Now we're talking about, let's establish a ground for loudness. Just like we did for 0 dB SPL, we established a ground for that. And we said the ground for 0 dB SPL was the softest it took to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance with 2 ears. Now we're making a ground for loudness, not intensity. We're not talking about the dB SPL anymore. How loudness, your perception of intensity. Pitch, your perception of frequency. Remember, this is psychoacoustics. All right, that's the middle of page 1 in your notes. And you look right here, the SONE, the loudness perception for normal hearing for a 1,000 hertz tone at 40 FONS or at 40 dB SPL. Now that's loudness. Let's look at pitch. Pitch, your subjective perception of frequency. And let's just look at a picture here, but when you read here, okay, subjective perception of frequency. In general, the higher the frequency, obviously, the higher your pitch perception. Talk to musicians, you know, they'll talk about pitch. Your music teacher, oh, she's got perfect pitch. You see, the artsy farts talks about pitch. The scientist talks about frequency. All right, so it depends on when you're talking from the heart or from the head. All right, anyway, psychoacoustics is about the heart, because it's your perception of things. Pitch depends mostly on frequency, but also a little bit on intensity and duration. But here's the kicker. A doubling of the octave frequency does not necessarily correspond to a doubling of pitch perception. Let me show you in a picture here. We'll go to another picture. Here you go. No, too far, Teddy, too far. All right, here's one. This is out of your Martin textbook. But look at this. Here is, take 1,000 hertz frequency. Okay? Now, let's say you double the frequency to 2,000 hertz. So you've gone from 1,000 hertz to 2,000 hertz. Your pitch perception of 1,000 hertz, let's call that 1,000 mels, M-E-L-S. Mel is the unit for pitch perception. Pitch, not frequency. Hertz, H-Z, is the unit for frequency. Mel, M-E-L, don't ask me, maybe it's named after a guy named Melvin. I don't know. But mel is the unit for pitch perception. So looky. We'll call everything is sent. We call 1,000 hertz our anchor. We anchor everything around that. Okay, your perception of 1,000 hertz, we'll call it 1,000 mels. Do you see where I'm drawing my cursor? All right. Look what happens when I double the frequency. I'm going to go to 2,000 hertz. What is your pitch perception of that when I increased it? Look at this. Do 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 do, and then 1,500. Doesn't quite match, does it? I doubled the frequency, but my pitch perception didn't correspond. It went up, but my pitch perception didn't double. I may have doubled the actual cycles per second. I may have doubled the frequency, but my pitch perception didn't double exactly along with it. My pitch perception went up, but it didn't double. All right, that's all I need you to know about pitch perception. That's all we know. The HIS doesn't mess with this. I'm just drawing the stuff together this morning to point out the fact that as you change intensity, your loudness perception doesn't go one-to-one with it. And as you change your frequency, your pitch perception doesn't necessarily go exactly along with it. Sure, as you make things more intense, your loudness perception goes up, but it's not a direct one-to-one relationship, all right? And the same thing happens with pitch. All right, now we are moving on down to the bottom of page 1. Let's move on down here. We've only got a 2-page thing here. Frequency resolution. Where have you heard that before? Last week. We talked about frequency resolution last week and a bit the week before. So now let's meet this person again. Frequency resolution. Shake his hand or shake her hand. Take a peek here. Recall from last week. Differential threshold. Remember the triangle? Differential threshold, specifically the just noticeable difference for frequency. Sometimes they call it delta F, or difference Lyman, or just noticeable difference, JND. Doesn't matter. They're all the same thing. I'll repeat what it is again. Let's say I play you 1,000 hertz tone. Now I make it 1,001 hertz. Could you hear that there was a change? Maybe not. Maybe they're too close together, you couldn't even tell. I'm playing you 1,000 hertz and now I change it to 1,002 hertz. Were you able to hear a change? Maybe. Change it from 1,000 hertz to 1,005 hertz. Were you able to notice a change? Maybe. How many hertz did I need to change for you to notice that there was a change? Just noticeable difference. Remember, we're not talking absolute threshold, because absolute threshold is, did you hear it or did you not? When you hot, you hot. When you're not, you're not. Okay? Differential threshold is, you already hear it. Now I'm asking, what's the smallest change I can make for you to notice that there's a change? You can do that with frequency. You can do that with intensity. I could play you 1,000 hertz at 40 dB SPL and now play it at 41 dB SPL. What was the smallest intensity change I could make before you could notice a difference? Okay, the difference Lyman is, you already hear it. What's the smallest change required? And when you're talking in terms of frequency, we are calling that frequency resolution. And this ties right in with your anatomy class, right in with it. Let's look at it. Frequency discrimination or resolution is the ability to detect tiny changes in frequency. Delta F is smallest for the low to mid frequencies, larger than for the high frequencies. What do we mean by that? Okay, let's go to another picture here. This is showing you the same crap as this here. Same thing, okay? So blah, blah, done. Okay, look at this picture. Notice how all these lines are hugging the bottom here, and all of a sudden they shoot up over here. You've got a whole set of lines because you're talking here 5 dB, 10 dB, 20, 80, 40, regardless, who cares, okay? Overall, what this picture is telling you is, here's frequency on the horizontal, and the vertical is saying, what's the smallest change? Delta F in frequency. What's the smallest change I needed to make in order for you to notice that there was a change? And you can see that all the different intensities, doesn't matter, the smallest changes were required for the low to mid frequencies. When you get to higher frequencies, I need to make bigger changes for you to notice that there's a difference. Okay, so it tells us that our frequency resolution is pretty good from about 200 to about 2,000 hertz. Beyond that, our frequency resolution, our ability to detect tiny changes, becomes a bit more compromised. All right, we'll read what it says here now. Frequency resolution, the ability of your auditory system to distinguish between individual parts or between individual frequencies. It gets worse. Here's what we need to take home as HISs. This gets worse for sensory neural loss. Not conductive, sensory. Conductive hearing loss is like putting a plug in your ear. Always, always in your minds, think of conductive hearing loss as an earplug. Whether it's wax or whether it's middle ear infection, it's an ear plug. All that conductive loss needs is power, 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 working power. Just turn up the volume. I'll hear everything clear. You can test a kid with otitis media or someone with middle ear problems, crank up the volume and say all the words. The kid's going to hear every single word you say. All he wants is more intensity because he's got a plug in his ear. And when we mow the lawn or when we work with chainsaws, we put plugs in our ears to give ourselves a conductive hearing loss on purpose. We're doing that on purpose because we don't want to get noise damage. We don't want to damage our hair cells. So we give ourselves an earplug. So conductive loss has fantastic frequency resolution. All they need is sounds to be louder. And if it's louder, yep, they'll get all the words that you say in a hearing test during speech testing. They're going to get 100%. All they need is more intensity. Okay? So their ability to distinguish between frequencies that are really close together, their JND, their delta F, okay, their difference Lyman is fantastic. Not sensory neural. Sensory neural loss hates hearing aids. Conductive hearing loss, they like hearing aids. If a doctor says to somebody, you need to wear hearing aids because I can't fix your conductive hearing loss. Let's say there's so much gone wrong with the person's middle ear that the physician says, look, I can't surgically fix it. You need to wear hearing aids. Guess what? That person's going to be happier than a pig and you know what? Doesn't care. Hearing aids, yeah, they work perfect. Yep, they work just like eyeglasses. No problem. I can see. Healed, Jesus. Okay? Not the same with sensory neural. Sensory neural, they don't like their hearing aids because they've got poorer frequency resolution. They can't distinguish tiny differences in frequency. They need bigger changes for themselves to notice that there's a change. They've got damaged hair cells. And guess what? Because their delta F is gone, they can't separate speech from background noise as well. That's the source of the bitter complaint of background noise and hearing aid wearers. That's the source of it. It's hair cells, it's all about cochlear hair cell damage. Now let's share screen so I can describe pictorially what we're talking about here. So take a gander at this. Let's go to, yeah, here, it's hair cell damage. Look at this. Damaged outer hair cells. Look at this. Damaged normal inner and outer hair cells. Here's normal inner hair cells. Here's normal outer hair cells. Here's sensory neural hearing loss. The inner hair cells look pretty good. The damage usually begins most with the outer hair cells. Age, presbycusis, Presbyterian, Church of the Elders, presbycusis, hearing of the elders. Presbycusis is mostly caused by outer hair cell pathology. Now, when we look at what that means, these outer hair cells are no longer pulling this membrane down. I wonder if I can show you this way. Look at them. Look at these things move. See that? Look at the way the outer hair cells move. Let's go back again. Look at these guys. The inner hairs aren't touching that membrane, okay? They need the outer hair cells to pull that membrane down so that these inner hairs get bent. But because these outer hair cells are the moving part, they die quicker. Okay, you get that? So take a good look at this picture, what's happening here. The outer hair cells are attached to that tectorial membrane. When soft sounds activate the cochlea, the outer hair cells pull this membrane down so those inner hairs can send a message to your brain. But the outers die first because they are the active moving part in your system. And so outer hair cell pathology. Normal hair cells, damaged hair cells. Acoustics ties in with anatomy. Delta F is going to be poorer with this here. Why? Look, let's unroll the cochlea. It's unrolled. When it's unrolled, it's about 1 inch long. When it's unrolled, it's about 2.5 to 3 centimeters long. Always remember what a centimeter is, about the width of your fingernail. Okay, so you're unrolling it, and here's where the high frequencies are. Ironically enough, okay, the hair cell region, this is called the basilar membrane, has Dr. What's her name, Fernandez, described this to you in anatomy class? Have you had this? I hope you have, okay? The cochlea unrolled. This is the fat end of the cochlea, the wide end, where the foot plate of the stapes hits the oval window, but the hair cell region is narrowest here, okay? The cochlea may be biggest here. It's the fat end of the cochlea is where the high frequencies are. The narrow end of the cochlea is where the low frequencies are, right? But inside the hair cell region, look at this. You might have one row of inner hair cells. Follow my cursor. One row of inner hair cells all along the basilar membrane. At the apex of the cochlea, the skinny end, the floor upon which the hair cell sits, that floor is wider. So it goes back asswards to the way you think, okay? You have 5, check this out. You have 5 rows of outer hair cells here. You have about 4 rows of outer hair cells here, and you have about 3 rows of outer hair cells here. And the reason why highs stimulate these hair cells is because highs resonate with stiffness. And this area here is stiff, and it has not much mass. The reason why low frequencies stimulate the apex of the cochlea is because the hair cell region is wider, it has more mass, and it's less stiff. Never ever think sounds enter the cochlea. They don't. They activate. They make a fluid motion on the hair cell floor. Okay, they do this. Sound waves, remember, aren't doing this. Sound waves are longitudinal. Water waves, or waves like this, are transverse. I'm going to stop sharing and just highlight something with you. How long is a 240 hertz, 250 hertz tone? Well, you could figure that out. Wavelength equals speed of sound over the frequency. If you do that, guess what? A 250 hertz tone is 4.5 feet long. Okay? Do you think that's going to fit inside a 1-inch long cochlea? Hear the sound of ain't, or I should say, you should see the villa I have. Beautiful cottage on the edge of lake. Not. Okay? That 250 hertz tone is 4.5 feet long. That isn't going to get inside a 1-inch long cochlea. So sound waves don't enter the cochlea. Sound waves are sound waves. Traveling waves are traveling waves. Okay? And so sound waves cause traveling waves. Sound waves cause these to take place in the cochlea, but they don't. Sound waves themselves don't enter the cochlea. All right, so now look, here's where we're going with all this. Look at how dull and rounded this peak is. In this person is hearing a low frequency tone because the wave is activating low frequency hair cells near the apex. Okay, if it was a high frequency tone, then the traveling wave would have its peak over here where my cursor is. Remember, it's like keys on a piano. All right, so highs over on the right, lows on the left. So in this particular case, this guy's hearing a low frequency tone, but he's got damaged hair cells. So look at how broad his peak is. All these frequencies sound the same to him. He has poor frequency resolution. Watch what happens when you've got healthy outer hair cells. I'll try and move this darn thing. There. This is what happens with healthy outer hair cells. You're sending a low frequency tone to the ear again, and he's hearing the low frequency tone, but looky, look at how the peak got bigger, it got amplified, and it got sharpened. So this guy can, C-A-N, he can tell the difference between frequencies that are really close together, whereas this guy here can't. His delta F, his frequency resolution is poorer. He needs bigger changes for himself to notice that there's a change. Whereas this person here hears like a baby and can tell distinct, sharp differences between frequencies very close together. This is the reason why people dislike hearing aids, because their traveling waves are no longer sharpened by the outer hair cells. The outer hair cells are the muscles of the cochlea. They're that moving part, remember? They get tired, they die first, leaving you with traveling waves looking like this. That's why people hate hearing aids. They can't separate frequencies close together. They can't distinguish between frequencies close together anymore. Their frequency resolution is down, and they have difficulty separating speech from background noise. And that's the chief complaint from hearing aid wearers. And it's all about the action of these outer hair cells that are no longer doing their magic thing. It's quite a story about this, about our field that way. So this is the source of people's misery, and this is why I'm concentrating so much on frequency resolution, because it really ties in with, I think her name is Beth Fernandez's anatomy class. That's why acoustics and anatomy should always be taught in the same semester. Oh, because they crisscross each other's paths constantly. All right, so here's a picture I drew one time of this, of the same thing. Here's your hair cells all standing in a row, this black line here representing high frequencies on the right, mids over here, low frequencies there. This guy's hearing a low frequency sound. He's got a dull, rounded traveling wave, and the sharpening done by the outer hair cells is shown by the black dotted triangle here. When that's no longer done, the person's resolution of frequencies has gone down. All right, well, that's the main thing, and now we need to close or wind on to the close of today's session, and we're going to talk about look at the top of page 2. Come on over with me. I'm just here in Canada. I'm not far away from you. Come on over here. Gosh darn, I was in Indianapolis this past week. I was there for a conference, but that's about as close as I got to North Carolina. But I'm now way back on the West Coast. All right, have a look here. Place theory. Helmholtz. Look at this guy's name. Helmholtz. What is your name? My name is Klaus Helmholtz. Da. All right. He's the guy that came up with the fact that different frequencies are represented in different places. He's the guy that came up with the fact that highs are represented here and lows are represented there. That's called the place theory. What place in the cochlea? That's like keys on a piano. Highs on the right, lows on the left. Okay, specific frequencies are represented in specific places. And the word for that is tonotopic. Whoops, right there. Tonotopic. That word means specific frequencies are represented in specific places along the basilar membrane in the cochlea. Remember, the basilar membrane is the floor upon which all your hair cells stand. Okay, it's what does that ripple. It's that traveling wave thing. That's the floor. It's like me taking a rug going, okay, and the rug has all hair cells standing on it. Okay, that's the most common theory of pitch perception. That's the most common one. Traveling wave peak stimulates particular hair cells in a particular cochlear region. We've talked about that. Blah, blah, blah. You know, the outer hair cells amplify and sharpen the peak of the traveling wave. Yep, we've heard that. Old crap. But there's another guy by the name of Rutherford. And he says Well, you know how we perceive pitch is not really by that wave so much. It's how many times did the eighth nerve fire? With a 500 hertz tone, it fires 500 times a second. With a 250 hertz tone, the eighth nerve fires 250 times a second. I'll stop sharing here for a second. And with a 1,000 hertz tone, the eighth nerve would fire 1,000 times a second. Hold on, Rutherford. Not true. Nerves can't fire that fast. How now, brown cow? How are you going to explain how a 2,000 hertz tone is heard? And Rutherford would say, oh, well, how that's done is one nerve will be firing at 500 hertz and another nerve will be firing at 4 hertz. So 4 times 500 is 2,000. Oh, gosh, I think I like Helmholtz's theory better. And I think Kelly and I were talking about, or laughing a little bit about this last week. Well, theories are held for reasons. There's a couple of things that are not explained by Helmholtz's theory. And that's why the temporal theory still exists. Here's one of them, the revving of a motorbike. How come when you increase the revs, why does your pitch perception go up? Each da, 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 da of the motor is the same. Each blast of white noise, da, 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 transient little pieces of noise, da, 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 is the same. So how come when I make da, 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 faster, why does your pitch perception go up? Temporal theory explains that. Pitch place theory does not explain that. Okay? That's the one thing, periodicity pitch. So I'll share a screen and show you where we are in our notes, right there. Check this out. Some odd things about pitch perception that are not explained well by the place theory. They're not. There's 2 of them. Case of the missing fundamental, and the other one's periodicity pitch. We just talked about periodicity pitch. Come with me down that little walk here, or read it. Okay. Probably explained by temporal theory of neuron firings, but still has to be heard to be believed. Think of a series of noise explosions like a motorbike. Periodic interruptions of white noise explosions gives your pitch perception. Nothing in the white noise gives the pitch, only the interruption rate or the repetition rate does. All right? That theory is not well explained by Helmholtz's place theory. Here's another one. Look at this. Case of the missing fundamental. Now, I'll see if I can show a picture of that, and then we'll go back to the writing. Okay, where are we now? Let's see if we can find this puppy here. Okay, I think it's going to be one up. Go up, 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 up. Here it is. Perfect. All right. Take a look-see. You're playing 4 frequencies together at the top. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. You're playing 200 hertz, 400, 600, and 800 hertz, all at an equal intensity. And here's your sound wave. It's just some weird looking sound wave. Okay, whatever. Your overall perception, if I played those 4 tones together, your overall perception is going to be a pitch of about 200. You're going to hear, because each of these harmonics are 200 hertz apart. Okay? Now, stop the sound. Take out the fundamental frequency. Just remove the 200 hertz tone. Take it out and play these together. Guess what? Your overall perception of 2 plus 3 plus 4 is still going to be 200 hertz. Okay? Now that is not explained well by Helmholtz's place theory, because 200 hertz is not even stimulating the cochlea. Excuse me. So the only cue that's going to tell you is the separation between the frequencies. And that is going to be somewhat better explained, probably explained, not very well explained by the place theory. Pitch of complex tone is not necessarily determined by the pitch of the fundamental frequency. Complex tone with harmonics of 200 hertz apart, you'll hear a pitch of around 200 hertz. Take out the fundamental frequency, you'll still hear the low pitch from residual harmonics. That is also better explained by the temporal theory. Enough on that. Now, that's just two things that are just mentioned. Now let's finish today. Sensory neural loss and typical results. You know where we're going already. We've already talked about it. I'm going to show you a picture here. A picture. Take a wee picture here. Here you go. Why hearing aids for ears aren't like glasses for eyes. Unrolled cochlea again. Bloop, unroll it. 2.5 centimeters. About 1 inch long. Here's the basket. Look at how you've got two traveling waves. One here. One here, because you're playing two frequencies close together. This is in a normal hearing person with normal hair cells. And you play two frequencies close together, you're going to have two sharp traveling waves, and the guy's going to say, yep, I can hear both of those frequencies, I can hear the difference between them, yada, yada, yada. Now the middle panel shows hearing loss, sensory neural, outer hair cell damage. Notice that the amplitude is gone and the sharpness is gone. He's got two peaks, but they're not as highlighted anymore. Now he comes to you to get hearing aids, and you supply the person with hearing aids. So now he's wearing hearing aids on his ears, which amplify the sound. So yes, he's going to have larger traveling waves again. You've brought part of the picture back. You've increased something. What did you do? You increased the amplitude. You made sounds more intense. And to him, they are louder, which is good. Okay? But look at the sharpness of the peaks. That's still gone. Okay? You've made a small, dull traveling wave into a larger, dull traveling wave. And that's good. That's better than a small, dull traveling wave. But this here at the bottom ain't the top. That top, that sharpness is gone forever. That went down with the flood. That's gone. So hearing aids need to do two things. And always remember this, because you're going to learn this more next year too. Hearing aids have to increase the amplitude. Oh yeah, obviously, that's like duh. But the other thing they need to do is they need to increase what's called the signal to noise ratio. Signal being speech, noise being the noise. If the noise is 60, the hearing aids have to try to make the speech 65. You know what I'm saying? They have to separate. They have to. When you had normal hair cells and you had those sharp traveling waves, sure, you could distinguish frequencies close together. So background noise was a problem, but not a huge problem. With hearing aids, it is. So hearing aids, you've got to amplify. That's 50% of the solution. The other part is they have to somehow separate the speech from the noise so the hearing impaired person can do that. So you want to be able to, you can't fix the traveling waves anymore. Those are gone. You can never fix that. So how can you help this person distinguish between frequencies close together, like this guy here? Two ways. One is directional microphones, hearing aids with D mics. They call them directional microphones. It's two little tiny vampire holes on the hearing aid. If you start looking at your hearing aids, a directional mic has two little holes in it, not one. A regular mic has one hole for the sound to come in. Directional mics have two. And when you have a directional mic, the hearing aid is most sensitive to sounds in front of you. So if the speaker is talking in front of you, the hearing aid is concentrating on that speaker and not so much on the background noise around you. Okay, so one solution is directional mics. The second solution is digital noise reduction. And all digital hearing aids use some form of digital noise reduction. So those two things, D-mics and digital noise reduction, those help to increase what's called the signal to noise ratio. So if the amplified speech is like, or if the amplification coming in is hitting the guy's eardrum at 80 dB or something like that, you want the speech to be hitting at 85 and the noise hitting at 80. You want to somehow increase the gain or amplification for the speech compared to the noise. So the 100% solution is amplify plus increase signal to noise ratio. So as we read at the very bottom of page 2, what we'll see here, bottom of page 2, loss of frequency resolution due to outer hair cell damage. Both the traveling wave become blah, 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 become more shallow. Person can't distinguish between frequencies close together. Person can't separate speech from background noise as well. Unilateral hearing loss and directionality. Difficult localizing sounds with only one ear. We covered that last week. So have a look at Unit 4, because we covered why do we have two ears with binaural summation and directionality. Loudness growth and recruitment for the common binaural sensory neural loss. Let's see if I have a slide on that. I probably don't. This is oh yeah, look at this. Here you go. Here's hearing loss going down. An audio person's got good hearing in the lows, poorer hearing in the high frequencies, the audiogram. Typical sensory neural hearing loss, more outer hair cell death in the highs, less outer hair cell death in the lows. Most presbycusis is trouble hearing treble. They can't hear highs. So now, and this slide here is showing you just like the very first slide in our presentation. Here, showing you this curve, these curves. This, okay? So now I'm going to go to that slide and show you and tie the two things together. Whoops, here we go. So normal curve would be on the bottom. His floor is elevated. Look at this. His floor in the high frequencies, and yet his ceiling of loudness tolerance is the same as normal. Normal is the blue, abnormal is the red. So the audiogram is truly odd, ODD. I think it's upside down, because graphs usually plot more things as you go up. Not the audiogram, no, not us. We plot more going down. We're nuts. Anyway, this guy's hearing is going down in the high frequencies. It's poorer. And always remember, I'm tying two things together here from past units, especially Unit 4. Okay, this bottom curve is minimal audible pressure. Not minimal audible field, minimal audible pressure. The softest it took for the normal hearing person to hear 1,000 hertz and 2 and 4, all the different frequencies with one ear under a headphone. One ear. And so notice it doesn't touch 0 at 1,000 hertz. It doesn't. Look closely. It's not touching 0, as it's not with 2 ears. It's a little bit worse. Okay, it's elevated. Anyway, this minimal audible pressure is capital letters, underline, bold-faced, italics. That bottom curve is 0 dBHL. Remember that? Always take that home with you. These are salient, really important elements of this whole course. This is dBSPL. This is dBHL. So the softest it took in dBSPL for the normal hearing human to hear all the different frequencies with one ear under a headphone, that's minimal audible pressure. And minimal audible pressure is the flat line of 0 dBHL. They build in these differences into your audiometer. These differences across the frequency are built into your audiometer, And we call the whole darn thing 0 dBHL. That's why 0 is a flat and this is curved. These differences are all built in, and your audiometers are deliberately calibrated each year to make sure that 1,000 hertz is exactly this, and 500 hertz is exactly that, and 250 hertz is exactly that, and 4,000 hertz, you know what I'm saying, okay? That's the difference between dB-SPL and dB-HL. All right, carry on here, and presbycusis. As we can study, here's normal hearing, presbycusis, and the person can hear the loud, low-frequency sounds of speech, cannot hear the high-frequency sounds of speech. All right, basically, the bottom line of our thing here, the effects of speech: vowels remain audible, while consonants do not. High frequencies would require the most amplification. Clients want clarity, just not more intensity across all frequencies. The client wants to be having this amplification here in the highs. So most hearing aids are giving treble amplification because most elderly with hearing loss have trouble hearing treble. That's enough for me. I hope that's okay for you. I'm going to stop sharing screen. Have a sip of my cold coffee, gargle at you, and say peace and love. Does anybody have any questions? Are we okay? How you doing? Are we good here?
I have one on the delta.
Yes.
Now that's used for more than just frequency, right?
Oh yeah, you can use it for intensity too, but remember, that's not, we don't, as HISs, we don't mess with that one. That's more what researchers do, but yes, you can have delta F for frequency, delta I for intensity. Yep.
Okay, okay.
Okay, Tatanisha, how are you doing?
I am getting back to life.
Good.
I tried calling one time, but I was on my way to New York at the time when I called you.
I know. I got your phone call. I got it.
Yeah, so I figured you had things you had to do out of town and stuff. I'm just going to try to do my best, try to do what I can to finish out the semester.
Oh, hang in there. And if you do have questions again, I'm home these days. So.
Okay. What is the latest I can call you?
I'm 3 hours behind you. So I'm on Pacific Standard
Time that I could call you. What is the latest time?
A really good time to call me is either in the late morning or early afternoon Pacific Standard Time.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Live long and prosper. We'll see you when we look at you. I'll stop recording here.
Okay. So you sent me an email